It is a beautiful day to be alive, and I'm so glad we have this time together. I'm Sanaa Laybourne, she, her. I am a professor, scholar, connector, and avid reader. I've always loved learning about what's happening in our social world and sharing that knowledge, especially over a good cup of coffee. And so here we are. Each week on Let's Grab Coffee, I catch up with experts from across the country and around the world who are investigating our most pressing social issues and common curiosities. Over the next hour, you'll learn about their inspirations, motivations, and of course, what they know about the world around us. So go ahead and grab your cup of coffee, or maybe for today's show, a glass of a different fruit, and get ready for an engaging and insightful conversation. The United States is home to nearly 3,000 vineyards across the country, with at least one in every state. And we are also the world's largest importer of wine, bringing in almost 6 billion, yes, that's billion with a B, $6 billion worth of wine from around the globe. The nation consumes just shy of 1 billion gallons of wine annually. Whether you prefer reds, whites, pinks, or bubbles, do you know what's really in your favorite bottle? Wine's history is filled with tales of deception, and Rebecca Gibb's latest book, Vintage Crime: A Short History of Wine Fraud, provides a glimpse into some of the juiciest cases. Rebecca Gibb is a master of wine, a business owner, and an award winning wine journalist. She secured her first editorial role at wine trade magazine Harper's after being named UK Young Wine Writer of the Year in 2006. She's contributed to and edited several print and online wine titles and is currently an editor for Vinous, an online wine publication which has subscribers in more than 100 countries, publishing in-depth wine coverage and reviews. In 2015, Rebecca became the 384th Master of Wine in the world. In a record class of 24 graduates, she was awarded the Outstanding Achievement Award and the Boulanger Medal in recognition of outstanding tasting ability. Rebecca joins us today. Hi, Rebecca. So glad to have you here.
Hi, thank you for that lovely intro.
Oh, yes, of course. I'm so glad that we're able to chat. When I saw this title, Vintage Crime: A Short History of Wine Fraud, I said, oh my goodness, we have got to have a chat.
Wine, fraud. Who doesn't love it?
It has it all. So I was so excited to read this book. And when I tell you, it is very juicy. That was not just a play on words. I was like, oh my goodness, what has been going on in the wine world all these years? I have to know more.
It's the story that needs to be told, but they don't want you to know.
And for very good reason.
Well, I know they are juicy titles, but yeah, I also hope their play on words a little intoxicating too.
Absolutely. Well, I want to start with something that you mentioned in the book that I mentioned in your introduction, which is that you are a master of wine. It is a very distinguished honor, but could you explain to our listeners what it means to be a master of wine and the process to attaining that title?
Okay, sure. So, a Master of Wine is the Master of Wine exam is the highest qualification you can get if you're in the wine trade, and it's a global institution, and you have to be accepted onto the course first of all, which is not easy in itself. And then, yay, you celebrate that you're on the course, and then you have many years of study ahead. So, I think if you knew that, you'd probably celebrate less. And then yeah, so the whole point of it is at the end of these studies you sit exams. So you sit 5 theory exams, you sit 3 blind tasting exams. So this is probably the bit that really scares people, in that you sit down every day, every morning for 3 days, and you have 12 wines in front of you, and you have to write down where you think the wine is from, like down to the nearest village, and you have to identify what grape it is, and you have to say, how it was made just from tasting it. And yeah, I think that makes people really, really scared. So you do that, and then yeah, once you've done all that, they then ask you to write a dissertation, as if you haven't had enough pain already.
I love that. A little pain, a little pleasure, right?
Yeah, they love to call it the Everest of the wine world, and only about 1 in 10 people who ever start it get there. So yeah,
Wow.
I don't know what the stats are for getting out of Everest, but yeah, I imagine it's similar.
Oh my goodness. Now, have you always had an enjoyment and taste for wine, or how did you come into your wine journey?
Gosh, no, I didn't grow up with wine around me at all. No, I grew up more in like the beer drinking northeast England, and not that I was drinking beer underage, but well, maybe I was. But anyway, that's another story. But no, I was meant to. I had ambitions of being a political lobbyist for some reason at one point. Not really sure why in retrospect. But I was going to go and do an internship with a major international corporation, and then global economics got in the way, and I ended up doing a ski season in Australia randomly, and ended up meeting some really, really interesting people who had a winery and a vineyard. You know, I was only 20 at the time, and that was me sorted for life.
I love it. That sounds like a very fun way to find a career and also very exciting. My best friend and I, we love to drink wine, and we often go to wine tours in Michigan, which is closer to where she lives. And so that was the first time I ever had ice wine. And, so just enjoying different wines, learning about different wines is definitely more of a hobby for me. No journey to becoming, a sommelier or a master of wine or anything official, but I can definitely appreciate a good glass of wine.
Well, you've just taught me something I didn't know. I didn't know they made ice wines in Michigan. So there you go. Every day, that's a wonderful thing about wine, is that you don't ever truly master it, and that you will always learn something from the next person, even if they say they don't know much about wine.
I like that. Well, I certainly learned a lot from Vintage Crime. I was writing notes all in the margins, because you give us this great history, of course, of wine, but then I was also interested to know about how kind of some food and drink, some of the earliest food and drink um, foodies really evolved and the reviews. So there's a lot in here. But I'm wondering for you, how did you settle on this idea of fraud and crime in wine? Because there's so many different topics that you could have written for your dissertation, but yet this was a topic that stood out to you.
Well, look, I did try a couple of other titles first, and they got rejected, if I'm honest. But then, so I was searching for a topic. To be fair, when I was trying to write my dissertation after I passed the Master of Wine exams, and I was in my pajamas, much like I am now, actually, when I discovered. Sorry to the readers, it's probably the middle of the day when you're listening to this. It's a night time in England. So basically, I was reading a wonderful book on Champagne, the history of Champagne. It was written by great journalists, so it's an easy read. It's called Champagne, which is very imaginative, by a couple whose surnames are the Cladstrups. Very much recommend it. And they mentioned in one of the chapters, just very briefly, about the 1911 Champagne riots. And I'm thinking, champagne, that's a luxury drink. I really like it. Riots, something I could get into. Juice is flowing. I go and investigate a little bit further and realize there's very, very little written about this. Well, there's only a little bit in French. It's much more of a narrative history. And there's almost nothing apart from a lady at the University of Texas who's written a small part on it and a wider Champagne history. So I'm like, hang on a minute, this is a really neglected part of the wine world. I go and start investigating, and it turns out that one of the main factors in the 1911 Champagne riots, when they're burning down champagne houses and they're rioting in the streets, and the French army are stationed in the main city of Epernay, and they're charging down the streets at grape growers. One of the major reasons is that it's wine fraud, and that's sort of where the initial spark came from.
hmm I love this idea of wine fraud because when you get into it, it's of course a story as old as time. People want to make money. That is one of the big reasons for fraud. And I was really interested to know all of the ways that fraud has happened in wine since the beginning of time. And I'm wondering, is there one type of fraud or one way I would say that wine is maybe adulterated, or maybe we might say ameliorated, depending upon your point of view, that really sticks out to you as particularly maybe scandalous or just something that really sticks with you?
Gosh, yes. There's so many different types of fraud that have gone on through time, as you say. But I think the one that sticks out to me is the use of lead in wine to sweeten it. Because look, there's been so many missed opportunities. People think how did people add lead to wine? Well, what happened was they were taking basically before we had all this amazing wine technology, before we knew about, for like, we've only really got to grips with how to make wine and how to ship it from, France to the US, put it on a supermarket shelf, and it reach you as the winemaker intended. Now, this wasn't available for much of wine's history. It's really only past sort of 100 years that's been available. I mean, when you think about most Burgundies, they've really only been bottling them for like less than 100 years. It was all being shipped in barrel previously, and before that, the things were just spoiling and turning to, vinegar really, really quickly. So people were trying to camouflage or and people didn't get ripe grapes. They didn't have climate change like we do today. So they were picking unripe grapes. Then they were turning to vinegar. That ain't something that you wanted to drink. So people were getting grape juice and they were boiling it down, but often they were boiling it down in these lead-lined vessels. And they were doing that in Roman times. And then they were adding it to these sour wines to make them taste more lovely. Now, it became quite obvious that this was actually harming people throughout history, but it kept getting missed. I mean, even in like 1498, there was a papal bull saying you cannot add lead to wine. And then like 3 centuries later, people are still adding lead to wine and it's harming them and getting the health. And it isn't until like the 1990s that the FDA in the US actually banned lead-lined capsules on bottles. There have been so many missed opportunities throughout history for lead to be banned in wine that it's just crazy. I think that's one theme that runs from the very course of start of my book to the right to almost the end of the book. I'm just like, how did we let this happen?
Yes, but as you said, it was easy, it was a common practice, people understood it, and of course it simplified getting wine from one place to another, so definitely impacting profits. The lead in the wine also shocked me because I was like, "Oh my goodness, like that it would make it taste better." I clearly don't know a lot about lead and its properties, but I was like, wow, that you would put this into a wine. And I know there's some controversy over how much wine drinking might have impacted certain historical figures and led to their early demise, which I was also so intrigued to learn as well.
Yes, it's really interesting that wine fraud has not just affected the common man or the common woman throughout history. But let's face it, I was when we talk about men and women, I was seeking some females in my book, but God, the his and history in my book, I was desperately seeking women. So I did feel, but generally the fraudsters were men. So yeah, the dodgy dealings were male. But no, I mean, it really has been missed opportunities throughout time. And from the, as I say, the common man right through to some of the highest people in society have perhaps met their early demise through lead riddled Riesling, I guess.
Yes, you'll have to grab the book to find out who some of these people might have been, who fell to a delicious glass of wine. But you mentioned something in the book that really stuck with me, and you kind of even start the book with it too, which is this idea of what is authentic. So, what is authentic to the wine process? What makes a wine itself authentic? This idea of place and origin, but also this idea of process as well, how wines are created. And so I'm wondering for you, through the course of your research and even just the course of you enjoying wine, for you, is there such thing as an authentic wine, or what is part of authenticity for you?
You know what? The more I researched this book, the more confused I became about what was authentic to me. Because I have because I was a history graduate, and because I've done this book, I've always kind of seen it from both sides. And look, what is an authentic wine? I mean, one of the big things that I think, if we're talking about modern day, one of the big themes that's coming out at the moment, if you go to a cosmopolitan city, there are so many natural wine bars. So many natural wine bars. And these are guys, the people, guys, the men and women who are making what they call natural wines, believe that their wines are only truly authentic wines that are being made today. And they think that because they're not adding any yeast to the grapes, they're just letting the natural yeast that are on the grapes or in the winery ferment their wine. and they're not using any additives. And then they're not using sulfur dioxide, and sulfur dioxide is used. I mean, if you buy a pre-packeted fresh fruit that's freshly cut, it says E220 on it, and that's sulfur dioxide, and it's used as an antibacterial and an antioxidant. So if you have pre-packed apples or something, they don't go brown. And they say no to that. But the problem with that is that technology has come so far that we've learned that we do actually kind of need to add sulfur dioxide so that a wine doesn't spoil en route to market. And you know what the problem is with the whole natural wine, it's become very dogmatic, and they think their way it's their way or the highway. And I can't agree with that, because I've had far too many cloudy wines, re-fermenting wines that smell of farmyards. And you know what? I do not want a farmyard in my Riesling or my Merlot. Thank you very much. So to them, that's authentic. To other people, if you're like talking about Burgundy or Riesling, a truly pure Burgundy Pinot Noir or Burgundy Chardonnay, that has to be from one single, very specific vineyard. And you see the vineyards named on these wine labels. That's one thing. But then if you go to Bordeaux, you don't, and it's so Burgundy's like one single grape variety, one single vineyard. You go to Bordeaux and you see by the most famous chateaus, whether it's a Chateau Lafite or a Chateau Mouton Rothschild, and that's a blend of at least 3 grape varieties from vineyards that are potentially not contiguous, and but everyone says that's not authentic. And then it goes round and round, and it also depends on who you are. To a producer in Châteauneuf-du-Pape, his or her vineyard, Châteauneuf-du-Pape can only be made from that particular spot and in this particular way. Whereas there's other people who go, well, I like that style, I don't mind going elsewhere for it. So whether you're a consumer, whether you're a producer, whether you're a vendor of wine, that will influence your attitude towards what is authentic wine. So yeah, I'm really sorry, I don't have an answer.
No, I love that, because authenticity, it changes over time. Those definitions change over time. And especially when we think about the names and the place, as you detail in the book, that also is very shifting over time. What are the boundaries around a place, and how do those naming conventions change?
Sure. If you were buying like a bottle of Chablis or a bottle of Sancerre, in the 1960s, it was from a much smaller, tighter area than it is today. The boundaries have expanded as, due to market forces. Now, can those parts of Chablis or Sancerre be truly authentic because they aren't the original heartland? Yeah, this is one that can run and run and run, and you can get yourselves into all sorts of tangles, which I have done on several occasions.
I love this idea, though, of the authenticity and this desire for being able to say you have a wine from maybe this particular vineyard or this very, very small area or a certain time period, which again is supposed to add to its not just authenticity, but with authenticity also its status. And you talk about that in the book as well, how food and wine became a way of showing one's cultural sophistication, wine as a marker of class status, which becomes really interesting because it also becomes a way for fraud as well, for people to be deceived, for people to make more money. And I love those chapters and talking about these fraudulent bottles of expensive wine or historical wines.
Yeah, so basically, people aren't really drinking wine to show off their status, and that it doesn't become a valuable commodity until people start learning about wines, which are the best wines to get. Like it's just like the restaurants, which are the best restaurants to go to. Like people, like you look on Instagram today or TikTok, everyone wants to be seen going to so and so restaurant, they're taking pictures of their food. That's not something I like to see. Then I'm like, yeah, I can't be eating that. I'm gonna have my beans on toast. And anyway, so and then there's people taking like all these pictures of themselves with the beautiful bottles, and like, oh yeah, no one is taking a picture of themselves drinking 19 crimes, or like a bottle of Gallo White Zinfandel. No one is taking pictures of them. They're taking with the most expensive, the bottles of champagne, the bottles of Burgundy. It's like you want, and then you have this great fear of missing out. Yeah, but so yeah, people the intellectualization of food and wine and dining, it started to be associated with, you know, your status in life, because if you knew what the best thing was to have, it showed that if you knew, it showed that you had a higher intellect, therefore your standing in state in social circles was higher, and therefore it perpetuated this myth that you have to be drinking the very best according to these certain small strata of people, and this continues to this day.
Yes, it definitely does. Late towards the end of the book, you talk about some more recent wine crimes and cases of deception, which I always think are so humorous to me as somebody who's not spending $100,000 on a bottle of wine, but to find out that people have been tricked in this way and spend even more money to find out for sure if they have been fooled.
It is difficult to have a lot of sympathy for billionaires who have spent tens or even over £100,000 on a single bottle of wine. You know, there are better causes. So yes, they are. It's very difficult to feel sympathy for those victims, and you do. There is a bit of sort of, you do take some sort of pleasure in seeing them have the wool pulled over their eyes, for sure. But yes, there are some particular. I mean, the thing is with fraud is you don't know it's happened. Most people don't know it's happened to them, so they think that their bottle is correct unless they then pay for someone to come and inspect their cellar, and the authenticators come along and go, sorry, these are all fraudulent bottles. And then what happens to those bottles? You know, where do they go? Do these people admit that they have these fraudulent bottles? It's very rare that a wealthy middle-aged white man is going to come out and say, do you know what, I've bought a load of fake bottles, I've been duped out of hundreds of thousands of pounds. They don't do that. So it gets, a lot of the time it gets buried. So it's only really in the cases where people have the guts to come out and say, you know what, I've been scammed here, and I'm going to go after those people who have done this to me, that the stories come out, you know, and that comes out with Bill Koch, who is an industrialist, billionaire, America's Cup winner, you know, not short of a bob or two, but he's really the one in the last sort of like the 90s and early noughties who came out and went after the people who had duped him, and he was very upfront and honest. But you know, for him, you know, all the hundreds that haven't come out and, you know, gone after the people who duped them.
Yes, I think that gives us insight into how rampant fraud likely is. But also, it makes you question, was that fancy bottle of wine really what I thought it would be, or was it maybe something else? But you raise a good question, or a comment in the book was, does it matter if it's a quote unquote fraud or not? If you enjoyed the glass, if it was an enjoyable glass, if you got pleasure out of it, does it matter if it wasn't what the label said?
Some people would say absolutely it does, because if it isn't what you've bought, then you've been, obviously it's a crime has been committed. However, you know, it depends on your philosophy really and your opinion. You know, I could have drunk bottles of wine that were fraudulent. You could have drunk bottles of wine that were certainly adulterated, depending on your opinions. But yeah, but I don't think I have. I don't know, but I don't know. And therefore, I don't feel like I am a victim, because I didn't know. And I didn't know, and lots of people don't know. And it's only when the fraud is then comes to light that people then feel that they have been a victim in this case. But yeah, it all comes down to what the purpose of wine is about, I guess. And that comes back to the book, and it says, you know, why do we drink wine? Yeah, we drink wine at 5 o'clock in the afternoon because, you know, your child's come home from school and it's still another couple of hours until bedtime, and you really want just to ease your way to bedtime. And, you know, a glass of wine really helps that, especially when you're cooking dinner. But yeah, we can drink it because it's really delicious. We love it. And you know what? I'm a real nerd, and I really actually, when I've got far too many bottles of wine in my house. My husband keeps saying, "Don't buy any more wine," and then I buy more wine. It's a bit of a habit. I don't, you know, I'm not into handbags or shoes. He has more shoes than me, but I really like buying wine. But I just like looking at the bottles. I love looking at where something came from, the person who made it. I think about when it was made. I think how long I've had it. I think, when can I drink this? So I'm kind of one of the strange ones who can take pleasure in that sort of thing. But I also just enjoy drinking a glass of wine, like the majority of people who are not teetotal.
Yes, there is something simply in the pleasure of it, of having a nice bottle. Like you said, sometimes I find myself just looking at the labels, and that often draws me in if it's like some cute illustration or something that just is odd, also, and catches my eye. And so it is part of the pleasure, just being, drawn in by how a bottle looks. I don't know enough about wine to really be drawn in by the place or the, particular, where it's made. But having a glass of wine, especially with a friend or to mark an occasion, I also think of these different kind of food and drink memories. And it is often the case that maybe a glass of wine is the way that you remember some really wonderful moment in your life too.
Absolutely. I know it's not a glass of water, is it? Even though it's about 85% water. No, it feels special. You have specific wine glasses now. We all have specific one. We don't put it in our coffee cup. We put it in a special wine glass. There's a ceremony to it for sure. And I remember during COVID times as well, it was like we couldn't leave, but we could have a glass of wine. So I could have a little taste of France or a little taste of Italy, even if it was just through a glass of wine. You can travel through wine even if you don't leave your front door.
Yes, I love that idea of traveling through wine. And even if maybe that wine isn't really from where it says it's from, if you believe it to be true, you're still experiencing that travel.
You can close your eyes, you can go anywhere. Much cheaper
Absolutely.
that way as well. And
Definitely.
saves on air miles as well.
Absolutely. I love that idea. Wine about pleasure, about travel, and of course, about friendships as well, or a shared moment. And something that you wrote about in the book is that because of all these changes in kind of naming conventions or even how space and place have changed over time, you mentioned that at certain points, that wine has also been classified by the occasion. So, what occasion might call for, a certain wine over another? And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
This is one of my favorites. So yeah, we loved. So we're obsessed with like pairing wine with food these days. Oh, what will go with this dish? What will go with this dish? And I'm like, do you know what? Just relax, everybody. Yeah, just relax. If the wine doesn't go with the food, just drink the wine before the food, and then have it after. It doesn't really matter. Don't get yourself in a bother about that. But yeah, in ancient Egyptian times, they used to classify wines by events. So I think there's one for like parties. There's like one for I think my favorite ones is like the day when you have like one for when you've paid your tax bill, and that you'd need one with high alcohol for that to forget how much it was. That would be awful because sending it into the IRS is never going to be the greatest thing. Yeah, so things about things for celebration, wines for dancing. I think we should. I think the ancient Egyptians were onto something for sure, and we should maybe try that. It might be a lot less complicated.
Yes, I love that idea of a wine by the occasion. You know what to buy, or you also know how to start a certain occasion. I have the wine, so you know what this moment is for.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is, well, I think when you think about champagne, though, we or bubbles in general, we're having a celebration, we're toasting one of life's rites of passages, whether it's a wedding or a baptism, or all those sort of things. We celebrate that by opening typically a bottle of fizz. So that's definitely a wine that has been associated with a certain period and a time and occasion. However, that a lot of that is marketing as well. That a lot of that has come through marketing, even like sort of late 19th century. That's when it started. The drinking for celebration through champagne, and they've done a cracking job of it. Let's face it, they've really nailed that one.
Yes, absolutely. And of course, it had to be marketing because why else do we, have some of these cultural beliefs so ingrained? This idea of champagne as the celebratory drink. Champagne has done a really good job of marketing itself because, of course, we couldn't talk about wine without talking about champagne. And, currently we joke so much about the naming importance of what can be called champagne and what cannot be called champagne. But in the book, you talk a little bit too. You unveil some of the reasons why that was the case, having to do with fraud, but also having to do with how important champagne was economically as well. And so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about this history of champagne.
Okay, so yeah, so originally, originally Champagne was sort of an area near a city of Troyes, that's a classical area. But then people in the late 19th century, early 20th century, don't glaze over yet. They were, yeah, they needed to draw a boundary around where Champagne was, but where was Champagne? And the people up in near Epinay, which is about a couple of hours drive north of Troyes, this which is spelled Troyes. It's they were like, no, we just want Champagne to be ours, and the others were like, no, well, we're the historical center of Champagne. We think it should be around us too. And they were like, no, we want to exclude you, and they're like, don't you dare exclude us. Anyway, this goes on and on and on. And that's one of the things that figures in the Champagne riots in 1911 as well as a fraud. But also the problem was that if you're making wine sparkling in the cellars of Champagne, do the grapes have to be grown in Champagne, wherever that may be? Depends on who you are. But yeah, they were shipping in. I mean, they were trucking in by train, grapes and wine from further afield, with the Languedoc, which is in southern France, or the Loire Valley. It was coming in and it was going into cellars, the Champagne cellars, which are beautiful to visit. But they were going in there and they were going in as Loire still wine or Languedoc still white wine, and it was coming out as champagne. Now, if it's been made sparkling and fizzy in champagne and you stick a champagne label on it, is it champagne or not? People of Champagne, wherever they were, depending on whether that was down in Troyes or down in Epinay and Reims, they weren't very happy about this, the original grape growers, quite rightly. But then, it still goes on to this day. I mean, they're looking at extending the boundaries these days, and like they did in Chablis and Sancerre back in the 60s, 70s, they're looking at increasing the area. And you know what? There's been Champagne isn't making enough. Funnily that they should be looking at it right now. So yeah, they're looking at potentially wide villages in the wider area that could be included. So maybe there will be new champagne vineyards planted in the next 10 years. Who knows? Will people still think they're the true ones? God only knows. You can buy, I mean, you can share champagne, you can buy Californian champagne.
Mm-hmm.
But there's specific rules about that, and you can buy champagne in Russia because they've decided that in Russia you can only call Russian champagne the true champagne, not champagne from France. So it depends where you are in the world. It depends. Yeah, it's all once again very much like authenticity. It can be a subjective matter, but there are rule makers who have actually specified the boundaries. But once again, they are not fixed necessarily. Is
Mm-hmm.
that as clear as a murky glass of wine? I feel like it is.
Yes, I mean, something that the book highlights is all these changes throughout history, the different laws, the different policies, and the motivations behind making some of these rules to govern the wine that we eventually drink. And it's certainly fascinating. Now, because the book is about fraud, and we know that fraud will continue forever. Wherever there are human beings, there will be some sort of fraud happening. I was intrigued to learn about some of the ways that folks are trying to prevent fraud, a lot of the different technologies that are being used. And I'm wondering if you think that those different measures will actually stop fraud.
As you said, as long as there are humans who have got egos and a desire to have more money, I think that there will always be fraud. I don't think we can eradicate it. But we're gosh, yeah, we're trying. People are having a good go now. I think though that I think why we're having such a good go at it now is that up till about 10 years ago, I think the wine trade has stuck its head in the sand and they didn't really consider it a massive problem until a man then a man came along called Rudy Kurniawan, who got 10 years in jail in the US for wine fraud, and he'd really gone to town when it came to wine fraud. He did a job. He did slip up in the end, but and then the FBI, then raided his house, and it all ended up in tears. But there are lots of new technologies now, including QR codes and like special antennas on bottles that if you take the capsule, the top capsule off, it breaks. So you can't, like, one of the main frauds is refilling the actual genuine bottles with not the real stuff. So, but if a wine bottle has been opened, you can check whether it's been opened before, so that you are getting a secondhand bottle, which is not ideal. But there are also, it's interesting that since I published this book, I've been contacted by a number of startups who have actually started using AI technology and using forensic techniques in order for you to be able to check that bottle that you have is real. Yet the onus always seems to be on the purchaser, the buyer, rather than the vendor, the seller. So it's often these ways to test whether your wine is genuine or not. You either generally you have to open the bottle, which is not ideal, is it? And you have to have purchased it first, and then you have to prove that it's not, and it's proved that it's not the real thing. And to do that generally costs money. So where's the motivation to do that? Yes, if you've bought like Chateau Margaux, for example, they've gone for like the bells and whistles approach. They've gone for like a vintage specific mold, and they've gone for all like the labels and the capsules and the QR codes and the holograms and whatever is out there. I think they've thrown the kitchen sink at it in the hope that will give their buyers a little bit more assurance that they're getting the right. But you have to know what a genuine bottle looks like, and you have a lot of knowledge to be able to pick out the fakes from the genuine bottles, and that takes a lot of time. And most people just want a bottle of wine in their hands. They don't want to have to go on and get a degree in wine authentication to be able to spot the fakes. They are trusting the people who are selling it, and often in history, people have trusted their wine merchants, and they often become friends with the people who are selling them the wine. And are you really going to pull up somebody who you think is a friend and then start then start testing them just to make sure? There are blurred lines here, and but yeah, there is lots of new technology, and I think that I'm really interested to see if AI it could be a way to stamp it out. We'll see. Watch your space.
We shall see. I'm sure that, for folks who want to commit wine fraud, they will find a way to be smarter than some of this technology or just evolve along with it, I'm sure. So just a few fun questions for you, hopefully. Favorite wine, or maybe your favorite wine right now?
You haven't asked me that. Oh gosh, you have. Okay, I'm gonna say favorite wine. Look, I love sherry. It would be my desert island wine because it's made in a number of styles, and that's what I take to a desert island with me. I know it's like associated with old ladies, but I'm getting older every year.
I love that. Do you have a bucket list wine, a wine that you haven't been able to try, but you're like, if I could try any wine, I have to try this? Oh, thinking.
Do you know what? I think I'm really spoiled. Pass. I'll have to come back to you on that one. I know. I think I've been too spoiled.
I think that's a good thing, though, to be wine spoiled.
Has been totally wine spoiled. Well, I know, well, I know. First world problems.
Absolutely. We talked about wines for an occasion or classifying wines by occasion. So I'm wondering for you, what would be a good wine? What would be your wine for getting together with friends?
Okay, I'm really sorry. This is going to be super predictable, but I always open a bottle of champagne. And I love it. And you know what? I love champagne, and it just makes everyone so happy.
It
It
does.
feels so special. And you know what? I don't because when you've got a full-time job you're and you've got kids and you don't see your friends as often as you'd like to. So it's kind of a special occasion to see friends. I really do think it is. You should celebrate them.
Yes, I agree. And then last occasion, what would be your wine if you've gotten some bad news?
Oh, champagne. Definitely, definitely. If you're feeling sad, if you've had a terrible day, it makes you feel better. And if you've had a great day, it just makes it even better. Yeah. So I think this is becoming a bit more, I think this is getting going a bit one track, isn't it?
I love it. A champagne for every occasion.
Absolutely. Even midweek. Do you know what you should do? I mean, I buy half bottle. I always have a half bottle in the fridge. Because really, just have a bottle on your own. If there's no one around, you can open it with there's enough for two with like 1.5 glasses. But if you're on your own, it's enough. It's 3 glasses, 3 small glasses. You know, it just seems like a perfect amount. You should always have it in the fridge.
I love that. Just, a little half bottle of champagne in your fridge at all times because you have to be prepared. You never know when the occasion will call for it.
Don't you've got to be prepared. That's what I
You
learned from going to Girl Guides.
You've got to be prepared. All right, when people buy your book and they're ready to sink into this short history of wine fraud, what is the wine that they should be drinking with it?
Okay, I'm gonna say not champagne here. Although I'd really like it to be. I think that it should be whatever you want it to be. Now, I think that, you know what, I would like it to be. I don't want it to be too serious a wine because you know what? Most wine books are quite boring. Okay. And there's no fun in them. There's no juicy stories. It tends to be all about grape varieties and soils and how many hectares a vineyard is, which quite frankly makes everyone glaze over. So don't have something too conservative or serious. Have a really fun wine. So like get a glass of Beaujolais. That's always delicious. Which is get made from the Gamay grape. Have a really fun time. Have a Sauvignon Blanc for goodness sake. Don't take life too seriously and don't let wine people tell you like you should be drinking this serious wine. Have fun with it. Drink something you like for goodness sake. Life's too short.
Oh, I absolutely love that. And Rebecca, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk with you today about vintage crime, a short history of wine fraud. Thank you so much for being with us.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you again to Rebecca Gibb. She is the author of Vintage Crime, A Short History of Wine Fraud. And let me tell you, Rebecca is absolutely right. This is a great book to read with your favorite wine, or if you don't drink wine, it's fine. Grab your favorite beverage, maybe it is that cup of coffee, and settle in for a very entertaining and juicy read. Trust me, I'm all up in the margins of the book with little notes. I'm like, OMG, I can't believe this happened. There's a lot of scandals in wine history, and you will want to know what made it into the glass and what didn't. As I was reading this book, it made me think about one of my favorite wines, which it's not mentioned in the book, but one of my favorites is a Malbec. And here's the thing. I think we currently associate Malbec with coming from Argentina. And when you're looking for that bottle, you're probably looking for Argentina to be on it because in our minds, that's where the really good Malbecs come from. But I was surprised to learn that Malbec actually originated in France. And the word Malbec originates from a French word meaning bad mouth because look, the French winemakers had a very poor opinion about the grape that makes Malbec, and they thought, you know what, this wine, it's not gonna make it. It will be forgotten. It'll be lost into history. But no, it was not. Malbec was brought to Argentina in 1852 by Michel Pugot, a French agronomist, that's probably not how you say that, who was hired by the Argentine government, and it grew in popularity because of the way that it adapted to the terroir of Mendoza. And so that's a little bit of wine history that I learned as I was preparing for this conversation today. I would love to hear what your favorite wine is. And to all those folks who like a good Sauvignon Blanc, look, Rebecca has just validated and affirmed your choice of wine. I thought that was just the best reminder that, look, wine is ultimately, it is about pleasure. So whatever you like, that is perfectly fine. Don't let these wine snobs tell you that that is not a good choice. The best wine is the one that's in your hand and the one that you share with friends. Well, I have definitely enjoyed sharing this time together with you. This is Let's Grab Coffee on WYXR 91.7 FM. I am here every week talking to interesting experts from across the globe who are helping us understand the world around us and even the world right here at home in that glass of wine that you go to after a long day or after just an exciting afternoon. Join me back here, 91.7 FM, WYXR, right here, Memphis, Tennessee, your community radio station. This is Let's Grab Coffee.